Curtis Windom shot a man twice in the back through a passenger window in broad daylight. Then he walked around to finish the job with 2 more bullets as his victim lay bleeding on the pavement. But that was just the beginning. November 7, 1992. Winter Park, Florida. What started as a dispute over $2,000 would spiral into something far darker. 3 people would die that day. 3 families shattered. All because of money pocket change to some, a death sentence to others. Witnesses said Windom's eyes looked different that morning. Bugged out. Wild. Like something had snapped inside his head. The question that would haunt investigators for decades: was this a man pushed past his breaking point, or a calculated predator who'd been waiting for an excuse? The bodies told one story. The evidence told another. And Curtis Windom? He had his own version of events, one that would take 33 years to resolve. Florida leads the nation in executions. In 2025 alone, they've made history with unprecedented numbers. But this case stands apart. Not because of the method. Not because of the timeline. But because of what those few hours on November 7th revealed about the thin line between desperation and pure evil. The clock started ticking that day. For justice. For closure. For answers to questions that would echo through courtrooms and families for over 3 decades. Some debts, it turns out, can never truly be paid. But Florida was about to try. Winter Park, Florida. November 7, 1992. A Saturday that started like any other in this quiet Orlando suburb where families felt safe walking their tree-lined streets after dark. By 6:17 that evening, 3 people would be dead. Shot down in broad daylight. Their blood staining the asphalt of a community that had never seen anything like this. Johnnie Lee was 28 years old. A man trying to make an honest living, working construction, supporting his family. He had no idea that stepping outside his apartment complex that afternoon would be the last decision he'd ever make. What he thought was a simple meeting with someone he knew would become his execution. Valerie Davis was Curtis Windom's girlfriend. 26 years old. A woman caught between love and fear, between staying and leaving. She'd been living with Windom, sharing an apartment, sharing a bed with a man whose eyes had started looking different. Whose behavior had neighbors whispering behind closed doors. Recent arrests for drug possession had put them both on edge. The relationship was fracturing. She didn't know that her boyfriend had already committed murder. Didn't know he was driving straight to their apartment. Didn't know that the man she'd been intimate with was about to pull that same trigger on her. Mary Lubin was 51. A mother. A woman who'd raised Valerie, loved her, worried about her daughter's choices in men. When the call came that Valerie had been shot, Mary did what any mother would do. She left work immediately. Drove toward the scene. Her maternal instincts overriding any sense of personal danger. She stopped at a stop sign 3 blocks from where her daughter lay dying. Curtis Windom was waiting. 3 different locations. 3 separate crime scenes. 3 families destroyed in the span of hours. But this wasn't random violence. This wasn't a stranger lurking in shadows. Every victim knew their killer. Trusted him. Had no reason to believe their lives were in immediate danger. The streets of Winter Park had seen domestic disputes before. Drug-related incidents weren't uncommon in 1992. But a calculated execution-style triple homicide? In broad daylight? With witnesses watching from apartment windows and passing cars. This was something else entirely. This was personal. This was methodical. This was a man who'd crossed a line that most people can't even imagine approaching. Police radio chatter crackled through the early evening air as units responded to multiple shooting reports. Officers arrived at scene after scene, each more horrific than the last. The same weapon. The same calculated violence. The same killer moving through their community like a predator who'd tasted blood and wanted more. Curtis Windom wasn't finished. The question investigators would ask for the next 3 decades was simple but chilling. If he hadn't been caught that night, how many more would have died? The clock was ticking. Winter Park's nightmare had only just begun. Curtis Windom had been living a double life. To some, he was just another face in Winter Park's working-class neighborhoods. To others, he was a man spiraling into something darker. The relationship with Valerie Davis was toxic from the start. They shared an apartment. Shared drugs. Shared a lifestyle that kept them on the wrong side of the law. Recent arrests for drug possession had put both of them in the system's crosshairs. But neighbors noticed something else about Curtis. Something that made them lock their doors a little earlier each night. His eyes had changed. Witnesses would later describe them as bugged out, wild, unfocused, completely detached from reality. The man Valerie had fallen for was disappearing, replaced by someone who scared even hardened drug users in their circle. The $2,000 debt with Johnnie Lee wasn't just about money. It was about respect. About power. About a man whose grip on reality was slipping faster than anyone realized. Curtis claimed Johnnie owed him. Johnnie disputed it. In the warped logic of a mind consumed by drugs and rage, that disagreement became a death sentence. But here's what investigators couldn't understand: the methodical nature of what happened next. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a drug deal gone wrong. This was systematic. Calculated. The work of someone who'd crossed from user to predator. Valerie had tried to distance herself from Curtis in the days leading up to November 7th. Friends said she was scared. Said she'd started talking about leaving. About getting clean. About starting over somewhere Curtis couldn't find her. She was 3 days too late. The separation had triggered something in Curtis that those closest to him had never seen before. Not anger, something colder. Something that made him methodically plan not just one murder but 3. Something that made him capable of looking into the eyes of people who trusted him and pulling the trigger without hesitation. Investigators would spend decades trying to understand what transformed Curtis Windom from a small-time drug user into a triple murderer. The drugs? The relationship? The debt? Or was there something deeper, something that had been waiting inside him all along for the right moment to emerge? The answer would determine not just his fate, but whether Winter Park's nightmare would ever truly end. Saturday afternoon. November 7th. 3:47 p.m. Johnnie Lee stepped outside his apartment complex expecting a simple conversation about money. What he got was 2 bullets in the back through the passenger window of a car. He fell forward onto the pavement, still alive, still breathing, still believing this was somehow survivable. Curtis Windom walked around the car. Stood over Johnny's body. Fired 2 more shots at point-blank range. In broad daylight, with witnesses watching from windows, Curtis had just crossed the line there was no coming back from. But he wasn't done. Not even close. The drive to his shared apartment with Valerie took 12 minutes. 12 minutes for Curtis to process what he'd just done. 12 minutes to decide whether this was madness or the beginning of something he'd been planning all along. Witnesses who saw him during that drive would later describe his appearance as horrifying eyes completely detached from reality, moving with the mechanical precision of someone operating on pure instinct. Valerie was at home when he arrived. She had no idea her boyfriend had just committed murder. No idea that the man walking through their front door was carrying the same gun that had just killed Johnnie Lee. No idea that her attempts to leave Curtis had sealed her fate 3 days earlier. The gunshots that ended Valerie Davis's life were heard by neighbors who would later say they knew immediately something terrible had happened. Not just because of the sound, because of the silence that followed. The kind of silence that falls over a place where someone's soul has just been torn away. Curtis left the apartment. Left Valerie's body. Left behind any pretense that this was about money or drugs or relationship problems. Mary Lubin had received the call at work. Your daughter's been shot. She dropped everything. Drove toward the scene where Valerie lay dying, her maternal instincts overriding every rational thought about personal safety. She had no way of knowing that Curtis was already hunting for her. The stop sign was 3 blocks from where her daughter had been killed. A routine traffic stop that should have lasted 30 seconds. Mary came to a complete stop, just like she'd done thousands of times before. Curtis Windom was waiting. As if he'd known exactly where grief would lead a mother's heart. 2 more gunshots. 2 more families destroyed. 1 more name added to a killing spree that had transformed Winter Park's quiet streets into a hunting ground. 3 murders. 6 hours. 1 killer who seemed to move through the community like he owned it. But Curtis had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated how quickly news travels in a small community where everyone knows everyone. The first 911 call came in at 3:52 p.m. Shots fired. Man down in the parking lot. By 4:15 p.m. Winter Park police were dealing with their worst nightmare: multiple crime scenes, multiple victims, and witnesses describing the same killer moving through their community like a predator who'd lost all sense of consequence. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at the Johnnie Lee scene first. Blood pooled around the body. Shell casings scattered across the asphalt. But it was the witness statements that made her blood run cold. A man with bugged-out eyes. Moving with mechanical precision. No emotion. No hesitation. No humanity. The second call, apartment complex shooting. Valerie Davis, 26, found dead in her living room. The third call 20 minutes later. Woman shot at a stop sign 3 blocks away. Mary Lubin, 51, killed while rushing to help her dying daughter. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic execution. Ballistics would later confirm what investigators already suspected: same weapon, same killer, same calculated brutality. But Curtis Windom had made one fatal error in his killing spree. He'd assumed chaos would provide cover. Instead, witnesses were connecting the dots faster than he could disappear. Mrs. Henderson from apartment 4B saw him leave the Valerie Davis scene. Those eyes, she told detectives. Like he wasn't even human anymore. Mr. Rodriguez from the stop sign witnessed the Mary Lubin shooting. Same description. Same chilling detail about a man who seemed to move through murder like it was routine business. The manhunt began at 6:30 p.m. Curtis Windom's name emerged within the first hour. Known associate of Valerie Davis. Recent drug arrest. History of violence. And according to multiple witnesses, the owner of those unforgettable bugged-out eyes that had haunted 3 separate crime scenes. By sunrise, every cop in Orange County knew Curtis Windom's face and that he was capable of killing anyone anywhere without warning. The arrest came 18 hours later. Curtis was found at a local motel, still carrying the murder weapon, still wearing clothes stained with his victim's blood. He didn't resist. Didn't run. Didn't seem surprised that his nightmare had finally caught up with him. But here's what investigators couldn't understand: his complete lack of emotion during booking. No remorse. No explanation. No acknowledgement that he just destroyed 3 families and terrorized an entire community. The evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints at 2 scenes. Ballistics matching all 3 murders. Witness identifications that were rock solid. And Curtis himself, acting like the arrest was just another inconvenience in his day. Community reaction was swift and visceral. Vigils for the victims. Demands for justice. Parents keeping children indoors not because Curtis was still loose, but because the realization had hit Winter Park like a sledgehammer: monsters don't just exist in movies. Sometimes they live next door. The trial began in 1993. 11 months after 3 families were destroyed in Winter Park. Curtis Windom sat in that courtroom like he was watching someone else's life unfold. No emotion when prosecutors displayed crime scene photos. No reaction when Valerie's sister testified through tears about losing both her sister and mother on the same day. No acknowledgement when Johnnie Lee's family described a man who'd never hurt anyone, gunned down over a disputed debt. The evidence was overwhelming. Ballistics. Fingerprints. Eyewitness testimony. A murder weapon found in his possession 18 hours after the killings. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on 3 counts of first-degree murder. The death sentence came 2 weeks later. What nobody expected was that justice would take 33 years to arrive. The appeals began immediately. Ineffective counsel. Mental competency issues. Claims that Curtis's drug-altered state during the murders constituted diminished capacity. His legal team argued that the man who committed those murders wasn't fully responsible for his actions, that substances had transformed him into someone else entirely. But here's what made this case different from typical death penalty appeals. The victims' families never wavered. Never accepted plea bargains. Never agreed to life sentences. For 33 years, they waited for the justice system to keep its promise. The legal battle stretched across decades. Federal courts. State appeals. Habeas corpus petitions. Each time Curtis's lawyers found new angles, new arguments, new reasons why their client's life should be spared. Mental illness. Inadequate representation. Prosecutorial misconduct. The appeals machine ground forward relentlessly. Meanwhile, Johnnie Lee's children grew up without their father. Valerie's sister Keemine Hunter raised her own family while carrying the weight of that November day in 1992. Mary Lubin's grandchildren never got to meet the grandmother who died rushing to save her daughter. The system designed to deliver justice had become a torture device for everyone except the killer. Recent appeals focused on claims of incompetent legal representation during the original trial. Curtis's current lawyers argued that his 1993 defense team had failed to adequately investigate his mental health history, failed to present evidence of his drug-induced psychosis, failed to humanize a man who'd committed inhuman acts. The courts weren't buying it. Appeals were denied at every level. The Florida Supreme Court. Federal District Courts. The U.S. Court of Appeals. Each rejection brought the victims' families one step closer to closure. The final appeal reached the U.S. Supreme Court in July 2025. The nation's highest court declined to hear the case without comment. No reprieve. No last-minute intervention. No more delays. Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant on July 29, 2025. Execution date, August 28, 2025. After 33 years of appeals, legal maneuvering, and delayed justice, Curtis Windom would finally face the consequences of that blood-soaked November afternoon in Winter Park. Curtis Windom wasn't just another death row inmate facing execution in 2025. He was part of something unprecedented in modern American history. Florida was setting records. 11 executions in a single year, more than any state had carried out since the death penalty was reinstated. More than Texas. More than Georgia. More than every other state combined in recent memory. Governor DeSantis had signed a flurry of death warrants throughout 2025, clearing death row at a pace that stunned even veteran prosecutors. Curtis became the 11th name on a list that kept growing with mechanical precision. By August 28, Florida had become America's execution capital, and nobody could explain why the pace had suddenly accelerated. The numbers told a stark story. Nationally, only 30 people had been executed in the United States by the time Curtis faced lethal injection. Florida accounted for more than one-third of all American executions in 2025. Other states were watching. Some with admiration. Others with concern. Death penalty advocates called it justice finally being served. Opponents labeled it a systematic rush to execution that prioritized speed over thorough review. But the families of victims saw something else entirely: closure after decades of waiting. Curtis's execution wasn't happening in isolation. Just weeks later, another death warrant had already been signed. Another date set. Another family preparing to watch justice delivered through a 3-drug cocktail administered in a sterile room at Florida State Prison. The execution chamber at Stark had become one of the busiest places in America. Corrections officers who once went months between executions were now preparing for them with routine frequency. The same protocols. The same procedures. The same final moments repeated with assembly line efficiency. Florida had transformed capital punishment from a rare event into a regular occurrence. But why 2025? Why this sudden acceleration after years of slower execution schedules? Political analysts pointed to Governor DeSantis' aggressive approach to criminal justice. Legal experts noted that many long-delayed appeals had finally reached their end points. Victims' rights advocates argued that justice delayed had become justice denied for too long. The broader implications stretched beyond Florida's borders. Other states were watching to see if Florida's approach would face legal challenges. Whether the federal courts would intervene. Whether public opinion would shift as the execution pace increased. Curtis Windom had committed his crimes in 1992 when Florida averaged fewer than 3 executions per year. 33 years later, he was facing death in a state that had revolutionized how quickly it moved from death sentence to final injection. The machinery of justice had changed. The question remained whether this new pace represented progress or something far more troubling about how America deals with its most violent criminals. August 28, 2025. 6:17 p.m. Florida State Prison near Stark. Curtis Windom was pronounced dead. Lethal injection. 3-drug cocktail administered with clinical precision. 33 years, 9 months, and 21 days after he gunned down 3 innocent people over a $2,000 debt. The witnesses included family members of his victims. Kimeen Hunter, sister to both Valerie Davis and Mary Lubin, had waited over 3 decades for this moment. Her statement was brief but powerful. This brings some closure. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. After 12,053 days on death row, justice had finally caught up with Curtis Windom. But the questions that haunted Winter Park in 1992 remained unanswered even as his heart stopped beating. What transforms an ordinary drug user into a methodical killer? What makes someone capable of looking into the eyes of people who trust them and pulling the trigger without hesitation? The Curtis Windom who committed those murders had bugged-out eyes and moved through his killing spree with mechanical precision. The Curtis Windom who died on that gurney had spent 33 years in a cell, never showing remorse, never explaining his actions, never acknowledging the 3 families he'd destroyed. His execution marked Florida's 11th of 2025, a modern record that positioned the state as America's execution capital. Governor DeSantis' flurry of death warrants had cleared death row at a pace unseen in recent decades. Curtis was part of a systematic acceleration that raised questions beyond individual cases. Did 33 years of appeals serve justice? Or had the system become so bogged down in legal maneuvering that closure became a privilege reserved only for families willing to wait decades? The machinery of justice had delivered its final verdict, but the cost of that machinery remained a question mark hanging over American capital punishment. 4 Johnnie Lee's children who grew up without their father. 4 Kimeen Hunter who lost her sister and mother on the same day. For the Winter Park community that learned monsters sometimes live next door. Curtis Windom's death provided finality but not answers. 3 families were destroyed on November 7, 1992. 1 killer died on August 28, 2025. The math of justice doesn't balance cleanly when measured in years, lives and tears. Florida's execution express continues rolling forward. More death warrants signed. More dates scheduled. More families waiting for closure that may or may not come within their lifetimes. Curtis Windom took his secrets to the grave. The why behind his transformation from user to killer died with him at 6:17 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in a sterile room designed for ending lives. What do you think? Did justice prevail after 33 years? Or does Florida's execution surge reveal deeper problems with how America handles its most violent criminals? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more deep dives into the cases that shape criminal justice in America.